Hi there, I'm Lillian. Welcome to my channel. Here I talk about what it's like to wake up one day and find yourself in a real nightmare. You discover that you're married to a covert narcissist. I talk about how I was baited through love bombing, trapped by a trauma bond, and stuck in blindness, unable to tell the difference between abuse and love for 34 years. Here I share my journey of how healing my feminine heart was the key to everything. I started to understand God in a whole new way, and His Word spoke to my heart in a way I didn't know it could. I learned to understand myself better, why I struggled with self-confidence, and why predators were always drawn to me. But the most significant revelation was that a healed heart can drive darkness away from light. If you're interested in going deeper into the content I've shared today, or if you're ready to begin your healing journey, I've created a PDF that goes along with this playlist to help you do that. I respond to emails the last week of the month if you would like support as you make your way, or to celebrate any healing you've experienced on your journey. I would love to hear from you. There's an email link in the description box. Today, I finally want to dive into 1 Peter 3 and talk about how I learned about those 3 feminine heart positions that I keep referring to from verse 4, and why they're precious to God, important for us and others, and how He will use them to expose a dangerous man. I know I took the long way around, and I was intentional about that, so thanks for sticking through it. These heart positions are the antidote to the naivety that got me trapped by a covert narcissist, and they're also the solution for the gullibility that kept me blind to the fact that I was trapped. The pivotal verse is 4, but it's the way all the verses tie together as a whole that helped my feminine understanding grasp both. I learned how to narrow my focus in on verse 4 at a conscious level, but at the same time feel the whole section. I know that sounds hard and maybe even contradictory. That's because I had never been taught how to think like a girl. There's a scene in the movie The Matrix when Neo's body is being repaired after he's been pulled out of the Matrix, and he says, "Why do my eyes hurt?" And Morpheus says, "Because you've never used them before." It's just like that with us. You have to learn to experience your feelings and emotions the way God intended you to. You've never done that before. Women, we know deep down inside we're different. We just don't understand what it is or how it is, or that it is a good difference. Diffuse awareness, which is how females think, right? Diffuse awareness is never just one thing. Remember, we live in one round room, and so we think in terms of everything all the time. Masculine thinking is linear. That means they can only be in one box at a time. They also have this unique ability to be able to think about nothing because they do have something called a nothing box. It's the opposite for us. We're never not thinking. We are experiencing everything all the time. Our processing is not linear. It's more like wheels within wheels. With us, it's one thing, but also never just one thing. When God said, "Let's create a human in our image," in Genesis 1:26 and 27, He said it 2 different ways because there's 2 different images that He's sharing with us. To repeat Himself would make Him redundant, and God's not redundant or superfluous. He's making a point by saying it the way that He said it right at the beginning of creation. Male is created by one method and is like God's image in that way. The feminine is created by a completely different method than the man and is like God's image in that different way. We are not the same image of God. Here's the reality. A female was not created as a wife or a mother, but because masculinity sees singularly and linearly, he thinks that femininity thinks like him. He reads the word female from Genesis 1:27, but he internalizes that one box as future role of wife. He reads the word helper from Genesis 2:18, and he internalizes that one box as the role of wife. He reads the word woman in Genesis 2:23, and he internalizes that one box as a role of a wife. It's in verse 24 that we see the completion of the masculine misunderstanding. God is still referring to the female creature as a woman, but the English masculine thinking has translated it to read wife. Eve wasn't called a wife until Genesis 4, verse 1. That means that a husband has a hard time seeing and understanding his female companion in her primary embodiment of femininity, which is helper, ezer. Helper is translated from ezer, and woman is translated from the word soft. Do you see it? God's intention for us was masculine and feminine in relationship first, then marriage. The cleaving of the masculine to the feminine in verse 24 does not end. It's the beginning of it. So the thrust of 1 Peter 3 is not verse 1. The masculine interpretation, remember, it's linear. It says that there's only one thing in that one box, and that's submission, because he sees the female, the woman, only in the role of a wife. And that's why he only sees submission. I always got stuck there because a woman doesn't have a box for that single subject, or any box for any subject. But because I had only been taught to process in the masculine, I had the priority wrong. I was trying to expand the box of submission to fit into the expanse of my female thinking. And a woman's thinking is a round room, so that one box of submission ended up saturating everything in my round room thinking. Marriage is a little wheel. It's a bit part. Like the prologue in a poem, the purpose is to illuminate the main idea or character. The little wheel isn't the substance. Marriage is a little wheel in my whole life. It's a bit part. It is not the main part. It's not the substance. Verses 1, 2, and 3 from 1 Peter 3 are bit parts that introduce you to the plot. That's the war between God's kingdom and Satan's kingdom. Verses 1, 2, and 3 push the reader from the prologue into the verses that really matter, verses 4 and 5. Verses 1, 2, and 3 are things you do. And anytime you do anything, you're functioning in masculinity because activity and accomplishment orient from testosterone. These functions in verses 1, 2, and 3 have nothing to do with your relationship with God, which is the main subject. All the little indicators from verse 1, 2, and 3 are merely support of the main subject. God is pointing us to himself. He appears in verse 4. When it comes to relationship, it's verse 4 that tells us what is the most important and why. He's the most important to us women. It's God that validates your worth. Not verse 1, the role of a wife, not submission, not your husband, not marriage. Not verse 2, religious, pious behaviors and actions. And not verse 3, how you present your outward looks. You know, women are highly adaptable creatures. That's the design of femininity. We seek connection, friendships, relationship. If you try and get yourself validated from verses 1, 2, and 3. That means you leave God out of the equation. You're going to be trapped in a scary, dangerous mess. If you read 1 Peter 3 and you begin with submission, religious behavior, and grooming tips for wives, and then end with submission in marriage, you've compartmentalized subjects into boxes. Your understanding is incomplete and possibly even wrong, because your starting and stopping point is marriage. You know what that means? Marriage and your role of wife slowly becomes the be-all and end-all, and your husband sits in the place of God. In verses 5 and 6 are the metaphorical epilogue. It's hope. In part 2, I talked about God telling us, if you do what is right. We're doing what is right when we have our hope placed in God, not the success of your marriage. I was naive. My gullibility got it all mixed up, because a broken heart can't see straight. We can't feel what's real and right. To begin and end your understanding of marriage with headship and submission, it conditions you to believe that it's the marriage that holds up God. That's a lie. Your relationship with God is the center. It's God that structures and holds up and builds the two ends around himself. Marriage is not a human endeavor. God creates it and grows it. He is the hero of the whole story. So as I work through these 3 positions, listen against that backdrop of the reality of God's intention towards you. Your heart is what is most precious to him, and you are the great worth in his sight. He created you as a female creature to live in the natural realm, but for the purposes of being in relationship with him, a supernatural being. The relationship with him is what will heal and free you. That's verse 4 through 6, not anything found in verses 1 through 3. Discretion is the first heart shift. It's learning to live in compassionate clarity. I know it's hard to imagine when you've got a dysfunctional situation in front of you and you're smack dab in the middle of a conflict, but compassionate clarity will remind you that the true enemy is God's enemy, and that your real battle is with the forces of unseen darkness, Ephesians 6:11 through 12, not with the humans that inhabit the space. This is true whether you're married to a dysfunctional husband or a dangerous man. Let's start with what compassionate clarity is not. Christendom loves to quote, "Love the person, hate the sin." That's wrong. Compassion isn't about hating outward actions and showing love to the person who's sinning, meaning they want you to embrace the husband who is chewing on your leg, but hate the fact that he's causing you to limp. Or in some cases, you can't even walk anymore because the sin against you is so deep, you've lost the ability in both your legs. And I'm not speaking metaphorically when I say the ability in both your legs. There was a point, I think I shared briefly in one of my introduction videos. I had lost the ability to walk for 2 years. I was stuck in a chair. My back and lower extremities were in so much pain because I had absorbed so much abuse into my body and my cells that my body was starting to give out. So that's not really a metaphor when I say lost the ability in both of your legs. Using the idiom, love the sinner, hate the sin, all it does in marriage is make a husband not accountable for his choices and actions. They've got it backwards, and that confuses the sheep that are living with an enemy in their home. But worse, it gives the wolves permission to continue to destroy a lamb. There's no embracing a person that's sinning against you. Embracing is the exact thing we are not supposed to do when sin is expressed. This is why I say, pull back from his actions. the sin he's done towards you. Don't embrace it. Compassionate clarity is when you don't enable someone to be a better sinner. It's when you don't pretend that everything's fine, so that sinning against you becomes easier because you've just ignored it and called it love. We're all on a journey in this life, and that includes your husband. A healthy man doesn't wake up every day and want to fight with you. He doesn't look for ways to hurt you or take advantage of you. The difficulties and conflict you experience with him happen through ignorance, neglect, or lack of relationship skills that we can both have with each other. But the dangerous man, he wears the facade of ignorance. That makes all his abuse that's perpetuated against you appear like lack of relationship skills. The dangerous man does wake up with the intention to damage you every day. He's thinking of ways to push you or bait you into conflict, to hurt you, and to blame you. Compassionate clarity is not just choosing to not engage in conflict. It's intentionally reversing your focus like a car. You want to move backwards, away from him, instead of pushing forward towards him to try and figure it out. Whenever there's anything that's sitting in the space between the two of you, there's something that needs to be resolved, a problem that's turned into a conflict. Discretion is the embodiment of a quiet spirit. You can't stop and drop from cognitive thinking into a subconscious feeling while you are trying to actively engage in problem solving. It's the quiet spirit from verse 4 that honors God. But in order to embody that quiet spirit, you need time and space. You do what is right because your heart is what matters to God. He wants you to be fearless about your faith in him. Verse 6. Doing what is right is holding the peace within yourself. God calls her the inner woman. You can't stay in your peace if you're up in your head trying to solve a problem for your husband because he won't take responsibility for it. The definition of discretion is behaving or speaking in a way that avoids causing offense or revealing private information. The word quiet from 1 Peter 3 doesn't mean do not talk. That's the masculine perception. But to a female, it means there's a time to talk and a time not to talk. Discretion can feel the difference. There's already an offense between you two that you've tried to talk about. Discretion says you both know. What you're trying to clarify is motive. He will reveal himself if you just give him the opportunity to do it. By continuing to talk and talk and talk, you just push a healthy man away. But if you're married to a wolf, you're being gullible because you're revealing private information that discretion wouldn't. See, as a broken lamb, you manifest as a people pleaser or a codependent. I use the terms interchangeably because there's so much overlap in the behaviors. They're basically the same brokenness. As that people pleaser, you're always centered on others as the outcome for your connectedness and for a sense of validation. So what you end up seeing is that a quiet and gentle spirit is always for others, but it's actually for you first. You cannot love others as you love yourself if you do not love yourself first. But instead of focusing on self-care first, we focus on others first. And that's why we veer into one of two errors, and both lack discretion. We think that quiet and gentle spirit means just take all the abuse and don't say anything. You know, love your husband, but hate his abuse. Or you push forward into your masculine in your overthinking and over-explaining, doing all the work to try and explain what he's done wrong to you and resolve the conflict for him. Both of these are blinding to the reality of how femininity thinks and feels. You won't be able to see the difference between a healthy but difficult husband who's relationally dysfunctional and a man that's truly dangerous and toxic. When you continue to push forward to solve a problem that he's responsible for, it's how you emasculate a healthy man. A healthy husband wants to solve his own problems. Success and accomplishment boost up his testosterone. He feels more of his masculinity through achievement, especially if that achievement is fixing a problem with you. But emasculation, that's the whole reason the sheep suit works for a wolf. The covert narcissist, that toxic male, mimics a healthy husband who's being emasculated. Either one of these arrows work for him. What doesn't work for the wolf is a feminine discretion. The second heart shift is to not respond in like. This is kind of like not sinking to a lower level, or two wrongs don't make a right. God says it in lots of different ways. He says it in 1 Peter 3:9, Romans 12:17, Romans 12:21, and in 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 15. You've already addressed the problem by voicing what you didn't like and how you feel. This is where you separate. You separate you from him. It's a boundary between his words and actions, the things that belong to him, and your feelings and emotions, things that belong to you. How you feel, not how he made you feel. Your feelings and emotions are yours to be responsible for. I always wanted him to not hurt me so that I wouldn't feel hurt or feel pain or feel bad. Do you see? In a roundabout way, I wanted him to mature and take all the responsibility to not cause me any pain so that I wouldn't have to take responsibility for my own emotions and feelings by looking inside myself. This is a complete lack of boundaries. You cannot be gracious without them. Femininity has this responsibility to hold her peace instead of returning evil for evil. It's the power found in graciousness instead of fighting dirty. Nobody can make you argue, nor can this man force you to mirror good back to him when he's being a bad husband to you. It's a choice you make to resist offensive or hurtful actions instead of absorbing them. At this point in most conflicts, you still don't know whether you're dealing with a difficult husband or a dangerous man yet. In either case, though, the mindset of graciousness is still the same. Graciousness is defined as kindness and warm courtesy filled with tact and propriety. Like discretion, graciousness isn't something you learn how to respond with. It's something you grow in. Like Jesus grew in stature in Luke 2:52, before he was led into the wilderness and before he was tempted. He didn't learn in the midst of a present conflict from Satan. Jesus was able to handle himself already. We have to learn how to handle our own femininity graciously so that we can live in a protected way in our boundaries. If you're married to a wolf, talking and continuing to engage in conflict means you're literally throwing your pearls before swine. There can be no resolution to any conflict. Hurting you more is the point of the conflict. I had no tact or propriety. The proof was in the consistent conflicts and fights. Jesus never lost himself in the midst of a trial, though. He was peaceful, patient, and truthful. These are fruit from the Spirit. The first thing to note is that it wasn't Jesus that was instigating. He wasn't on the offensive. The second thing to note is what the final outcome was when Jesus responded with tact and propriety. Luke 4:18 says that Satan left him. Graciousness diffuses conflict so that you don't lose your peace and composure of who you are in Christ. Graciousness taught me that There's no truth that can't be voiced with love, kindness, and compassion. And that includes the truth about how I feel. This leads me to my final position. Presence at a distance. It takes two to tango, right? Conflict is natural in relationships, sometimes. The hard part is to tell if it's a real conflict in a dysfunctional relationship, or is it yet another game the wolf is playing, like what Satan was doing with Jesus in the wilderness? Femininity has the unique ability to be present and remote at the same time. This one needs to be practiced and developed. Well, as your heart increases with discretion and grace, presence at a distance is what emerges. We all understand that men see things in boxes and women live in a round room. Men experience one thing at a time in hyperfocus. They can move from box to box, but they can't be in two boxes at once. Women can. It's just that we don't call it that because our experience is the opposite to boxes. All of our being is present in one box. It just doesn't have any corners. Women experience everything all the time. Hyper-awareness. The best way I've ever heard it described is diffuse awareness. We absorb our environment. Presence means to be aware. Distance means emotionally unengaged from the situation. Because it takes two to tango, you remove yourself from the dance by emotionally distancing yourself in the present time while still in the dance. Your feelings from the past can surface because you've given them the space to do so. You can be in the present and the past at the same time. Let me try and explain the feeling of the experience to you. You know what a stereogram is. In order to see the hidden picture, you have to relax your eyes and unfocus. That's what diffuse awareness is like. You've got to be careful though. There's a temptation to do what I used to do. It was flatlining. The psychological term is called detaching. I didn't know it at the time. It was a coping mechanism to try and stay safe instead of being baited deeper and deeper into a fight with him. That's not what I mean when I say to be unengaged emotionally. I flatlined because I didn't understand my femininity and I had no boundaries. I didn't realize that flatlining is actually masculine. It's stoic and detached. I built a wall around me that kept everyone out, including my kids. Boundaries aren't walls. As a female, you can't be curious about a person if you've built a wall around yourself that keeps them out. That's what presence means. It means paying attention and being curious. Your focus is intentionally seeing and hearing. See, if you flatline, you're placing your trust in yourself because you've cut everything off, everyone and everything, including God. In Proverbs 3:5, God says to trust in Him with all your heart and not rely on your own understanding. Presence is leaning into your emotions while trusting Him instead of yourself. That's what Peter means when he says to fearlessly do what is right. I know everyone says, build your boundaries, and I even phrase it that way in the header to my channel. But that's not actually what happens for us feminine creatures, as it's relative to romantic relationships. When my heart's positioned as compassionate clarity, in unfocused ease and not responding to evil with evil, boundaries of discretion and graceful presence emerge on their own. A boundary for a female is a consequence we experience from our state of being and knowing ourselves and self-care. In part 2, I talked about the fact that humans don't grow a marriage, only God does. And we can mistakenly think that a pregnant woman is the one that's growing the life inside of her. That's the wrong mindset. A woman doesn't do anything to grow a baby. God tells us it's neither the one who plants or the one who waters. They are not anything. It's only God who gives the growth. 1 Corinthians 3:7. God takes full credit for the growth of everything. So, respective to relationships and our reproductive parts, a man creates his own sperm. We don't create our eggs. God did that for us. Our body responds to the growing that God is doing. A woman could sleep for 9 months and the baby would still be grown by God. My point is that sex and reproduction happen as a manifestation of relationship, and in that, females are creatures of being and receiving. Masculinity is the intentional doing. Discretion, grace, and presence produce boundaries in women. Men possess natural boundaries through the boxes of compartmentalization. Every box is a pre-existing boundary. Remember, we don't have boxes. So it's paramount that we understand the importance and balance that God is telling us in 1 Peter 3:4. These 3 feminine heart sets give you the opportunity to hold your ground, to hold your peace, and to understand who you really are in God. He knows you possess that imperishable quality of a quiet and gentle spirit. He created you that way. What he needs is for you to be able to see it, believe it, and be it. Instead of going into a limbic state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn as you collapse in on your personhood and autonomy through people-pleasing to keep the peace, your best self comes to the surface in a healthy boundary. And it's really exciting because what you're doing is embodying the peacemaking that Jesus talks about in Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called daughters of God. Your feminine heart gets recreated in your healing. As a kingdom warrior, you'll fight delicately in shrewdness, like Jesus says in Matthew 10:16, cunning as a snake, but gentle like a dove. You are a female. Your cunning and gentleness are different than the cunning and gentleness of masculinity. Embodying these 3 traits are what manifest boundaries. Boundaries aren't arbitrarily built. I mean, you can, but that's having to live in your conscious mind, right? Always analyzing and picking and choosing. That all happens in the conscious mind. It's a masculine process. With us females, the process of creating boundaries is from the feelings and emotions in the subconscious mind. It's an organic process for us in collaboration with trusting God's power. That's doing what is right. Closing thoughts. First, shh. Don't say a word about this to him. Discovering that your husband's dangerous is a scary place to end up. It's never where you thought you'd be, and it feels like an unreality. But your silence about your awareness of what he really is, that's your safety zone. And always remember, a clueless guy that causes dysfunction and seems difficult, he's not dangerous. But the malignant man is not clueless. He just pretends to be difficult and dysfunctional so that he can hide how dangerous he is.